find out if you're ready for love. Here's your marvelous host, Nikki Lee.
Hello, and welcome to Ready for Love Radio. This is your host and love coach, Nikki Lee. Today, we are going to tackle a difficult topic that I think a lot of people don't really understand the gravity of it and what an issue it is here in the States and throughout the world. So we're gonna tackle the topic of human trafficking, and I have got an internationally recognized authority on human trafficking with me today. I figure if you're going to do it, make sure you get somebody that knows what they're talking about. So my guest is Nancy Hartwell, and one of her focuses is the 21st century slave trade focused on the oil-rich states of the Persian Gulf. And she became fascinated and horrified by human trafficking when a German friend of hers disappeared, and it was lately rumored she'd been sold to a sultan in Libya. And she's written 3 books on the subject that form her human trafficking series. The first one is Harem Slave, which actually got to number 7 in the fiction category on Amazon, and I can tell you I know how hard that is to do. And then she also has book 2, which is, I don't know how to pronounce it, but it's The Prince's Favorite. And the third is Voices from the Harem. All of these are perennial bestsellers. So, Nancy, I'm thrilled to have you with me today.
Well, thank you, Nikki. I'm really tickled to be here.
Well, like I said, it's a topic I don't think people want to think about and that sort of thing. But I think, like I said, well, we were talking before the show, and it's almost as a public service. It's information I want to get out there and have people so that they can listen in the privacy of their home when they're up to it, and to just educate people about what's going on, because people may think this only happens in third world countries, but that's not true at all, is it?
I'm afraid not. It happens absolutely everywhere, and it's a much bigger problem than most people realize. Even though slavery has been outlawed almost everywhere, there are more slaves on earth right now than at any time in human history. The State Department estimates that there are between 25 and 30 million slaves worldwide. And they also estimate that approximately 2 million of these are in highly developed countries like the United States.
Yes, that's so hard to believe. Not saying it's not
mind-boggling. Yeah, it's mind-boggling.
It is. Well, and we're going to get into some details because people probably have an idea of their mind in as far as the sort of people, the sort of situations. But I mean, I was doing some research yesterday. I like to get into these shows and have an idea what I'm talking about, and I couldn't believe the information I was finding. And a lot of times people just assume it's just having people in the sex trades, but that's just the tip of the iceberg with this kind of thing. So
yes, there are many kinds of modern-day slavery. The most common is forced labor. For example, the World Cup, which is going to take place in Qatar in 2022,
right? The
facilities are being built by slave labor, and the conditions are so horrendous that they have been averaging a death a day. These are mostly young men from India, Nepal, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Somalia, who were lured to by promises of wonderful jobs. And when they got there, they were betrayed and trapped. And these are young men. These are not sex slaves. They're labor slaves. And that is the most common form of slavery in the world today. The sex slave trade gets a lot of publicity because it's a little bit more lurid. Nevertheless, young men are at great risk of being trapped into involuntary servitude.
Right. Like I said, it boggles my mind. It really does. Well, and one of the things that we're going to head on with some more detail, but in the front page of your website, you've got some interesting facts about human trafficking. And one of the things is it says the victims of human trafficking are controlled physically, psychologically, emotionally, and financially. They can't just walk away because they're usually, living in terror of what the captor is going to do to either them or their family. And
right,
so it just
their lives are being threatened unless they toe the line. Yes, right. And their families too. Yes, and this is not something you can just poo-poo and say, oh well, they just don't know how to take care of themselves. Traffickers are professionals. They know how to do this, and they know what works and what doesn't work, and the rest of us are absolutely no match for them. So we need to take this very seriously indeed.
Definitely. Okay. Let me see. Some of the information I was looking at said that there's 3 basic elements to human trafficking. One of them is the act, that's what is done, the means, how it's done, and third is why it's done. So all 3 of those are important things to take a look at. I would think greed is one of the big reasons they do this kind of thing.
Yes, Nikki, it is a multi-billion-dollar international industry. Traffickers make tons and tons and tons of money, and they don't care that they're destroying lives. No. They simply do not care. They're making tons of money, and a lot of it is controlled by organized crime. But it is a very lucrative business.
One
yes,
of the
greed, like you say, yes.
One of the definitions I found was the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for labor or services through the use of force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of subjection to involuntary servitude, debt bondage, or slavery. That covers a whole lot of territory and a lot of situations.
Yes.
And
yes, but that's a very good definition, yes.
That's why I saved it. I like that one. So, well, like I said, and sometimes you just, that's about as concise as I saw. Everybody else had big, long, huge descriptions, but that sums it all up in one very...
right, and it does cover a lot of territory. For example, it mentions debt slavery.
Right.
This turns out to be, okay, this is especially common in northern India, by the way. There's a family that's faced with a crisis, some financial crisis, maybe life-saving surgery or something of that nature, and they don't have the means to pay for this emergency. So what they do, somebody will advance them the money in exchange for their labor. Now, if it were a fair exchange, we wouldn't be talking about this today, but it's usually rigged so that the debtor ends up spending like 5 years to repay a $500 debt, and then it's further rigged so that the debtor continues to get even deeper into debt. For example, the food that is provided is so inadequate that the debtor is obliged to buy more food from the debt holder, of course. So what turns out to be a temporary situation ends up being permanent, and somebody can spend 25 years paying off a $500 debt. It's really, really rigged. Yes.
Okay, now considering about the whole financial angle of this, there's something I want to clear up, that these two things are not the same. There is a difference between human trafficking and human smuggling, because people, especially in like the border states and with all the talk about immigration, I think people are very familiar with the term human smuggling. But
right.
Those are not the same thing. What are some of the differences between those two situations?
Okay, well, smuggling is when somebody promises to help somebody get to a desirable destination, usually for a very high price. For example, like the coyotes that help people get from the Mexican border across the desert in Arizona, or at least they pretend that they're going to help people. Right. Or like these ferry operators who are currently preying on all of the refugees from Syria. That is smuggling when it's an illicit trade, but it is simply to transport people from a dangerous situation to a more desirable situation. And, of course, half the time it turns into trafficking because the smugglers are crooks. Right. But if it doesn't, then it's simply the crime of smuggling. But these people are still at very great risk of being trafficked in addition to being ripped off, because a lot of times the smugglers are dishonest. But there is a distinction between human smuggling and human trafficking, yes.
Right. Well, like I said, I just wanted to kind of go ahead and get that clear up front so people aren't thinking that human smuggling is the same thing, because they are not the same thing.
They are not the same. You're correct.
Smuggling can evolve into a trafficking situation depending on who you're dealing with, but they don't start out the same way. Right.
But it's still people preying on the vulnerable and taking advantage of people who are desperately trying to improve their lives.
Definitely. All right. Just a few of the statistics I found. Said 12.3 million adults and children are in forced labor or forced prostitution around the world, which I would think is probably a higher number than that.
Probably.
800,000 people are trafficked across international borders each year. 14,500 to 17,500 of those international victims enter the United States, which sadly that doesn't surprise me. It says almost 25% of those international victims end up in the southeastern United States. That surprised me. And
that's where. Well, I would say the southeastern U.S. and California. That's where the migrant farmers go.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And then between 100,000 and 300,000 minors are at risk of commercial sexual exploitation. These numbers are horrifying. They really, really are.
Oh, they give me the chills.
Well, like I said, it's the kind of thing that people start to hear about it and they don't want to hear anymore. They just kind of block it out. But, I mean, for the safety of ourselves, children and all that, it's the kind of thing we need to face. That's why we're talking about it today.
Absolutely. And if we try to shield our children from knowing about these crimes, we're putting them at additional risk because they don't know what the dangers out there are.
Right. Well, the thing is, you want to, whatever you do, you want to make it age appropriate, but they need to understand there are dangers in the world. There's a whole lot of dangers.
Right, and not everybody out there with a cute puppy is a nice person.
No, definitely not. Definitely not. Okay, so vulnerabilities. You mentioned that people preying on vulnerable individuals.
Right.
Who would be vulnerable to becoming a victim of domestic or international human trafficking? What sort of people are we talking about?
Okay, well, a runaway would be, traffickers can spot runaways at 50 paces, and they have like red flashing lights on them. Come take advantage of me. Typical situation, they're abused so severely at home that they say, damn it, I'm not going to put up with this another minute, and they run away. But they don't have anywhere to run to. So they go to a mall and they sit there or something, or they go to a bus station or a train station, and there are traffickers out there trolling these places looking for runaways. And they will find an excuse to strike up a conversation and offer shelter and, a shoulder to cry on and pretend to become their loyal and concerned friend. And for a few weeks, in fact, they might actually, pretend to be one. But then once the targeted person is emotionally dependent on them, and probably financially dependent on them by this time too, then they move in for the kill. Well, sweetheart, it's time you started showing me some gratitude.
Right.
Now, for somebody trying to be a pimp, this works very well. Do the math, Nikki. If a pimp can control 10 girls, which is not unusual, and each girl is obliged to bring him a minimum of $300 a day, that's $1 million a year.
Mm.
So there's some motivation for controlling 10 girls, and the runaways and the other girls who look like they have low self-esteem or they look traumatized. These are the ones that are the low-hanging fruit that traffickers go after as a general rule. If you know anybody out there who's planning to run away from home, please, please, please help them find some other solution. Most communities have shelters where runaways can go. Find out what these shelters are in your community so that you will have some actual practical alternative to running away, but please help them find some other solution because they are at extreme risk.
Definitely. Some of the vulnerable populations, in addition to teens, which I would think is definitely a target audience, would be migrant workers, new immigrants, people that are socially or economically disadvantaged, and people that have been lured into the bigger cities, like maybe New York, LA, that sort of thing, and go there of their own free will because they think they're going to have a better life or get into acting or whatever reason they use. But then they're at the mercy of whoever sees them,
Well, what traffickers often do is lure people with a promise of a wonderful job or a wonderful opportunity, and then once they come, they're trapped into staying. For example, traffickers who are looking for young girls will put ads on websites that they know that young girls like, offering a fabulous opportunity as a model or a part in a movie or a tryout for a hot new band. Then once the girl shows up, and by the way, they go to a lot of trouble to make their offices look authentic, with movie posters and movie magazines and elaborately staged phone calls that make it sound like they're casting a remake of a major film. I mean, they make it look right. So the girl comes in and they ask her a question. It's 2 parts.
Right.
What they're really asking is the second part, but what the girl hears is the first part. And the question is, honey, do you have time to sit down and chat for a few minutes, or is there somebody waiting for you?
Exactly.
Now she hears, oh, he's taking me seriously. He wants to talk.
Right.
What he's asking is, have you come alone and unprotected?
Exactly.
And if she says, well, my dad had to drop something off at his karate studio next door, but he'll be right back, she won't get the job.
Right.
If she says, oh, no, that's okay, we can talk, he'll probably sit down and chat with her for a few minutes to put her completely at ease and to dispel all doubts that she might have about the reality of this wonderful opportunity. And then he'll say, well, here, let me show you into the studio. Well, the studio is probably a closet, and he'll dump her in and lock her in, and bingo, she becomes a statistic.
That's it. Well, I was looking, and you actually covered a whole lot of these, but one of the things I was looking at was how are victims recruited and controlled. They can be direct contact with the person, agents scouting for potential victims. See, exactly what you were saying, misleading advertisements about jobs, contacts on the Internet, and that's especially, you just you never know exactly who you're talking to online, you know. And I've told people, I've talked to people and they're like, well, you can't pretend to be somebody that you're not. I'm like, oh, yeah, you can. It's easy. You know, not a problem at all. But
and not only that, Nikki, but even Internet games. There are predators pretending to be other 11-year-olds on the other end of that Internet game. They're everywhere.
That's it. Well, there was this person that played some of the same games that I did on Facebook, and we talked a bunch of times. Turns out he was like 12 years old.
Yeah.
That wasn't what he was pretending to be. And and the pictures he used, of course, weren't him, you know. But it was funny because he sent a message.
They're everywhere. Yes.
That's it. So pretend you be older or younger, you know. But, well, the thing is, those ways of reaching out to a potential victim are much more subtle. But there are more abusive methods like coercing them to comply, which, you know, could include all kinds of things, extorting the person, kidnapping the person, or just using physical and emotional, you know, violence of some kind or abuse. So
right. Now, also there's this thing about sexting, you know, where a boyfriend will convince his girlfriend to send him a picture, you know, topless or something.
Right.
Well, guess what? Then they break up and he can blackmail her.
Exactly.
And have you ever heard of a boyfriend and girlfriend who broke up? I mean, you know, this might actually happen. And that's part of this whole process too. You were talking about extortion. Sometimes a guy will pretend to be madly in love with a girl on Facebook or wherever, and every time I see her smile, it just sends me into heaven. Oh, sweetheart, I've just got to meet you in person. And a lot of girls who show up for these secret appointments are never seen again.
Exactly. That's why I wanted to mention the contact him on the Internet. Thank you.
Yep.
So right in line with what I wanted.
The Internet has made recruiting for this awfully easy, unfortunately.
It floors me the things people do and say on the Internet. Even the people that share all their children's pictures all the time and they say where they live and where they go to school. I'm like, people, what are you doing?
What are you thinking? Right. Well, and parents really need to monitor their kids' social media sites. Yeah. Now, if you do it behind their back, you're going to be a bad person and you're going to set off World War III. But if you do it with your kids, you can turn it into kind of an educational moment. So you can point out pictures that never in a million years should have been posted on the Internet, or other postings that are full of red flags that even a savvy 13-year-old might not pick up on, so that you gradually inoculate the kids into knowing what is fishy and what is for real.
Right. That's it. They need to be involved. So we touched on this a little bit, but why don't the victims of trafficking just run away?
Right. Well, they are under such dire threats that they simply do not dare. Sometimes they will threaten the person themselves. Sometimes they will threaten a family member. I know of one case, for instance, where there was a girl, they targeted her specifically. She was very pretty, and they found out her routine, that she would take a particular bus to a particular place, and one day she missed the bus. So they sent a 70-year-old something man to pick her up. And so this grandfather shows up at the bus stop, and he says, honey, you can't sit here and wait for the next bus. It's almost an hour. This is a dangerous neighborhood. Where are you going? Let me take you. So she's not scared. She gets in the car with him, and he takes her straight to the pimp, who tells her, we know where your little girl goes to daycare, and if you don't do what we say, we are going to torture your little girl. and they will graphically describe how.
Of course.
Okay, well, if you're a mother, that's a serious threat. And these guys are so nasty that you suspect that they would actually do it. So this is really hard to get around. And they will use all kinds of techniques to coerce, to pressure, threat, blackmail, anything that works to get leverage, they will do.
That's it. So what kind of effect does trafficking have on the victim?
Well, it is totally devastating. I have a friend who works with girls who have been rescued from the streets of Baltimore. Mm-hmm. And they have a wonderful shelter there where they give us the girls who have been rescued, they continue their education. They give them marketable skills like being a pastry chef or, something else that's really fun and will make money in the legitimate market. But some of the girls are so traumatized, they do not trust anybody, even people who are genuinely trying to help them. They have been abused, deceived, betrayed, jerked around so often at a very vulnerable age that they simply do not trust anybody. And some of them actually go back to the streets. They hate it, but it's all they know.
Right.
And in a certain grotesque sense, they have a sense of security being on the streets, which is crazy because once a girl has been trafficked domestically, her life expectancy is approximately 6 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and most of them are trafficked in their early teens, say 14. So by the time she's 20, chances are she'll be dead through either a brutal pimp or brutal customer. After all, it's just a whore. Suicide or drug overdose. The pimp also often gets these girls hooked on expensive drugs as a further way of controlling them, and then he is their only source of these drugs. There are all kinds of ways to manipulate people, and pimps and traffickers know all of them. They know all the buttons to push, and the rest of us are really no match for them. This is how they spend their lives. They know what works. They know what doesn't work, and they keep experimenting until they find something that works. And this is how they spend their lives. This is what they know. It's what they do, and they find techniques that are extremely effective.
Well, and we're not really trying to scare people, but we're trying to wake people up.
That's right.
This is a very big problem. Don't listen to the most graphic parts of this and just go, oh, no, it can't happen here. You know what? Yes, it can. You'll be amazed where these things are going on. So now I want to talk about where could we possibly, obviously, if somebody's being trafficked sexually, there's certain places you're going to find them. But as far as just as a whole, for people being trafficked, where are some places that people could run into a human trafficking victim and not even have a clue the person could be in that situation? Does that make sense?
Okay. Massage parlors, nail parlors, sometimes in agricultural situations. They will be picking vegetables or fruits or something. And remember the case of Cleveland not long ago where this guy had managed to keep 3 girls slaves in his house in Cleveland, right under everybody's noses, okay? Now, there are a couple signs you can watch for. Number one, if there are locks outside,
right,
you can be pretty sure that that's to keep somebody in and not to keep bad people out. Number two, if they have put aluminum foil or opaque plastic over the windows, they're trying to hide something.
right.
And you might want to point this out to local authorities so that they could investigate. And if you see something kind of fishy, maybe just take a discrete picture and write down the date and the time. But don't try to do everything yourself, but do be aware of what's going on and let the authorities know. Also, if you see a girl on the street and it's 35 degrees and she's just wearing a sweater, you might get the impression that nobody is taking care of her and that she is not able to take care of herself. And you might ask a discreet question or two. Those are some of the places that we can see human trafficking victims that might be right under our noses, and unless we're alert to the idea, we wouldn't even give it a second thought.
You know, I was just thinking too, if you are interacting with a person you suspect may be in this situation, don't just listen to what they're saying. Watch their body language. Listen to what they're not saying. You know,
yes.
Because the idea that somebody that's being controlled to this degree would give you a flat-out honest answer right up front and willingly, that's probably not going to happen, I wouldn't think. You know, so
yeah, well, they'd be scared to death that you're an undercover quality control person also that would be sent specifically to find out if they're toeing the line or not. So they'd be scared to talk to you.
Right.
And you might be from the IRS, you might be from immigration, and their situation is probably not in, squeaky clean form, so they're scared to talk to you because you might deport them.
Well, in that kind of situation, too, they probably speak limited English, don't really understand the legal system in this country. They certainly don't know the laws. You know,
right.
And they could have been told, if you're discovered, then something horrible is going to happen or your family's going to be hurt. So, I mean, you have no idea what that person's been told and what they think when you first approach them. So, like I said,
absolutely.
You can tell if a person's being evasive, So just watch, like I said, watch their body language and listen for what they're not telling you, how they're not reacting. So,
very good point.
Thank you. And how to recognize the victim. Let me just, I found an awesome list. Let me see. Obviously, if somebody under 18 is engaged in commercial sexual activity, that should be a red flag. Whether they're being trafficked or not, that should be a red flag, I would think.
Yes.
If the person can or cannot come and go as they please, there's always somebody with them if they're not allowed to go outside. Well, like the girls you were talking about in Cleveland, they couldn't come and go as they please. Even if they were outside, he was always with them. If the person's being controlled or intimidated by somebody, if they may not speak on their own behalf, I hate when somebody always tries to talk for somebody else.
Right.
Let me see.
If somebody else has their documents, like if somebody has confiscated your driver's license or your passport, that's another controlling you. Yep.
That's it. If they're not familiar with the neighborhood that they're in, that they either live in or work in, that could be a sign of something. If they move frequently, if they have injuries, bruises, if they have visible signs of like cigarette burns or being cut or hurt in some other way, branding or scarring. I mean, you notice that people have unusual marks on them. Like you mentioned also, signs of malnutrition if they're not being fed enough.
Or inappropriately dressed for the weather, right?
Right. If they express fear or intimidation through their facial expressions or body language. I actually didn't read that before my other comment. So let me see. If they work excessively long or very unusual hours. Let me see, if there's bars in the windows, and this goes along with what you were saying as far as if they're blocking the windows so you can't see in, but also have they done something to the doors and the windows so the person can't get out? Is there barbed wire, security cameras, constant surveillance? If they avoid eye contact, and if they don't have their own identification documents, if they don't have a driver's license or a passport or something like that, all of those things, that doesn't guarantee they're a victim of human trafficking, but it's a red flag. And I love to provide red flags for people.
And if you see several of those red flags, your hackles should really go up. Yes.
Definitely. So this could be complicated, but if a person isn't being held captive physically, is it still considered trafficking, or could it still be considered trafficking? And we kind of touched on this, but I think it needs to be said.
Yes, because there are other ways of controlling people, like psychologically and financially. And yes, it doesn't have to be just physical control, although that's almost always a big part of it. But it is entirely possible, yeah.
Very true. Now, what kind of role does law enforcement play in addressing and handling human trafficking?
Okay, well, this is a big question, and that answer depends an awful lot on where you live. Some communities are very actively involved in combating this crime. Others pretty much ignore it. And I would strongly suggest that you go to a site for an organization called Polaris, Polaris, and they rate each state on its legal environment regarding human trafficking. And most states end up with a C or a D. We treat victims of human trafficking like they're common criminals. They're victimized at home, they're victimized again by a pimp, and they're victimized again by society because we treat them as if it's all their fault and they're common criminals. Right. There's only one state in the country that gets an A, and that is Tennessee.
Really?
So, yes. So you need to find out how your state ranks in the legal environment. Then identify the champions for human trafficking in your home state legislature, and then work with them to encourage the boys who just never have quite understood this issue so that we can improve at least the legal environment. Many communities also have task forces against human trafficking, and you might want to volunteer to serve on one of these task forces. What happens, however, Community A is very active in combating the crime, and Community B right next door isn't, so guess where the traffickers go?
Exactly.
Well, we need to put traffickers under pressure all the time, everywhere. We need to have a much more broad-based and widespread combat against this crime rather than here and there kind of being spotty depending on the neighborhood. So that's something that people can do to help law enforcement face up to this really overwhelming crime. There are also lots of local organizations that work hard against this crime. They're often associated with religious groups or community groups like Kiwanis or Rotary or something. You might want to get involved with them to help victims and also help educate people, especially like middle school students who are getting old enough to be really targets for this crime, to help make them aware of what's going on. Law enforcement can't do everything alone. They really need the help from citizens in the community And we can make a big dent in this problem if more of us get involved.
Very true. Very true. We just kind of assume that areas like New York, LA, any big city is going to have a lot of this kind of problem. And it's a target-rich environment, so I'm sure it is. But what are some examples that you know of the situations that have happened in smaller areas? Because I was mentioning to you before this, and people who've listened to the show might have heard. I did a show about not only a young woman that was kidnapped and then killed from UVA, which is in Charlottesville, Virginia, which is very close to me. But I also, when I started researching, I found out a lot of young women had been kidnapped, and some of them had also been killed from a very small community. The whole county has like less than 20,000 people in it. That's the kind of place you don't think this kind of thing is going to happen. And you don't assume that your daughter takes off to go to the store and she's going to have pictures taken and somebody kidnaps her and kills her at the corner store when, like I said, there aren't 10,000 people in your whole little community.
Right. This is not our stereotype of how it happens. I was interested to know that the two biggest prostitution rings on the East Coast in the United States, one of them works out of Toledo, Ohio, and the other works out of Flushing, New York. We're not talking Boston. We're not talking Miami. We're not talking Washington, D.C.
Right.
Flushing, New York. It's everywhere. And we would be guilty of just wishful thinking if we think, oh, I'm in a rural community, it's not going to happen here. You remember the case of Natalie Holloway, the girl from Alabama who disappeared in Aruba a few years back?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, she was there on a high school graduation trip and disappeared. Now, the Dutch guy, Joran van der Sloot, he was originally questioned repeatedly regarding her assumed murder, but they never found a body.
Right.
And finally, 3 years later on Fox News, van der Sloot said, well, actually, I sold her into slavery to an Arab who works in the oil industry in Venezuela right next door. He later recanted that story, but that seems to be the most credible of all of the stories that he did tell about her. In fact, I even heard that the Arab that he sold her to, since she had become so well known, there was a great deal of prestige involved in owning her, and he actually paid several $1 million for the privilege of owning her.
Unreal.
It's everywhere. And by the way, Aruba is one of the principal centers of the international slave trade in the Western Hemisphere. They have three major industries there. Number one, drugs. Number two, trafficking. And number three, tourism. If you plan to go there, keep a good eye on your kids.
Well, that leads. See, you're so good. That leads right into my next question. We didn't plan this. No problem. What can parents do to protect the kids?
All right. First of all, like I said, you've got to monitor your kids' social media sites, and also encourage them if they have a question about something. Mom, what do you think about this? That they feel free to ask you, and you're not going to come down on them hard if they're bothering you with all these questions. Number two, have a family password. Traffickers in young children like to go to schools at the time that school is letting out. And they'll go up to a kid and say, and they'll see Brittany written on her school bag. Oh, Brittany, your mom couldn't come pick you up today, so she asked me to come get you. Now, if Brittany says, what's the password, and he doesn't know it, she knows not to go with him, okay? And by the way, be careful if you write Billy on his baseball cap or Brittany on her school bag. It's real easy for somebody to call them by name, and the kid doesn't associate that with their personalized belonging. Be careful about that. There was also recently an experiment that a guy carried out in a playground. He was a 30-something, clean-cut white guy with a cute little puppy. And he went up to a parent and said, look, I just want to find out, have you told your kids not to talk to strangers? And parents always said, yes, of course. He said, do you mind if I try to get your child to go off with me? Go right ahead.
I saw that. The parents were floored. That was a great test he did. And I love that he did it right in front of the parents.
Yes. Well, do you want to pet my puppy? Of course. I have more puppies. Do you want to go see my puppies? Oh, yes. And they'd go skipping off with him, holding his hand. Now, this is not the way we picture a kidnapping. Now, people have criticized that experiment because they say that it's possible that the kids saw him talking to their parents. Okay, it's possible, but probably not. What if they hadn't? And all the kids went off with him. Yeah.
Exactly.
So you need to warn people that not even everybody out there with a cute puppy is a nice person. And, of course, the kids are focused on the puppy rather than the fact that the guy is a stranger. They also have sneaky, sneaky ways that they get around not talking to strangers. For example, sometimes they work in pairs. One guy will come up and start groping a girl. She gets mad. He gropes her again. She gets even madder. Then a hero magically steps in and rescues her. Well, have you ever told your kids not to talk to heroes? Okay? The whole thing is a setup. They're in partners, but what they're trying to do is break the stranger barrier so that within 30 seconds they can extract all the information that they need from their target girl, where she's going, is somebody going to be meeting her, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You have to warn kids that they will try sneaky things like that. Or the old trick of letting out the air in a tire in a parking place. And then the target girl comes back to the car, and then the hero comes in and fixes the tire that, of course, he is the one who messed up in the first place, all the while carrying on a very pleasant conversation. So, yeah, these guys know what they're doing. They have all kinds of techniques that have been proven to work again and again and again.
Well, actually, we are almost out of time, believe it or not. So you mentioned to me that you put together a free course that you're going to have on your website. You want to tell the listeners about that?
Yes, it's called Modern Day Slavery 101. It's a 5-day course. And I have packed an awful lot of information into it about the different kinds of slavery, the kinds of situations that people find themselves in that end up leading to slavery, how the victims spend their lives once they've been caught up in this horrendous crime, who the main targets are, and then also finally what we can do about it as individuals and as communities to help combat the crime and then help the victims of this crime. It'll be a free download, and I encourage all of you to go on to nancyhartwell.com and download it. There's absolutely no obligation. It's simply a way to get the word out there so that people are aware of the different nature that this crime takes. No matter what you call it, it's slavery, and no matter what you call it, it is really heartbreaking.
Very true. like I said, well, it was funny because I saw the information about you being wanting to do radio interviews. And I thought, well, that's probably something I should cover. I'm not sure, how big an issue it really is in this country. But like I said, I started doing the research and I started reading your website, and just couldn't believe the scope of it. Like I said, you assume the 21st century this wouldn't be something we need to talk about anymore, but
right. But unfortunately, that's wishful thinking. Yeah, it's a big problem. And Nikki, I thank you so much for helping get the word out. I hope you have touched some lives in a very positive way today.
I hope we have too. And like I said, I want to make sure that people know. Well, you want to spell your name out for people so they'll know what your website is?
Okay, it's Nancy Hartwell, HARTWELL.com. And there's a lot of information there. I have links about my books there, and it's a resource that's meant for everybody to use in combating this crime. Thank you.
Very true. Okay, on my website, which is www.lovecoachjourney.com, you will also see information about the show, and I think I'm going to make the page go look for, if you don't see it on the front page, which it should be for at least the next few weeks, look at www.lovecoachjourney.com/human trafficking, all one word. And you'll find information about Nancy. You'll find links to her website. I'm going to put the link for Polaris, which she mentioned. I'm going to put that on there so we can kind of have an idea of what our local area is doing about this situation. And there will also be an archive of the show. So even after we air on Thursday night, you or anybody you know, feel free to recommend it to other people to take a listen to this and learn more about it. So the archive of the show will be there too, so people can hear it anytime or listen again. I always try to pack a whole lot of information into the hour that I'm on the air. But I figure with the archive, people can go back and listen again if they need to. So anyway, and I'll also have the link to the course that Nancy mentioned, which, like she said, it is free. The idea is to get the word out to people. So, and I plan as soon as you have it available, I'm going to download it because I want to learn more about it.
Absolutely.
But yeah, it's definitely something that people need to consider. And like I said, I do a lot of programs about more fun, lighthearted kind of topics, but sometimes there's just something that hits me that it is an issue, it is a problem, and especially when people are in danger and if kids are in danger. I love to cover those kind of things just because, we got to get the word out. I mean, people don't want to face a lot of these kind of things, but we need to deal with this kind of stuff. So I was talking to a friend right before we started doing this, and I said it's going to be a really intense hour. So I'm going to need somebody to like joke with me after we get done with this. But like I said, well, and like you said, and like I said earlier, even if only one person gets the message and it helps them, that's awesome. That's awesome. That's easily worth the time we put into it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So it is an issue, people. I mean, even in the U.S., like I said, we like to hope that things are better here, but, it's a problem here too. So unfortunately, we see it in the news way too frequently. So, Nancy, thank you very much for coming on today and sharing your information about this. And it was really cool how many notes I had down here, the stuff I wanted to talk about. You mentioned them before I got a chance to.
Okay, well, thank you, Nikki. I really appreciate the opportunity to help get the word out.
Awesome. Well, listeners, I hope that you got some information today that you can use. Like I said, feel free to come back and listen to the archive. lovecoachjourney.com/human trafficking. And trafficking actually has a K in it, so it may not be spelled exactly like you think. It's HUMANTRAFFICKING, I believe. And I'm doing that off the top of my head.
Yep, you got it right. Bingo.
Awesome. All right, listeners, and I will see you all next time on Ready for Love Radio.